really helps you prepare for that. But Mariah, why don't you give us your 60-second spiel on advice for students on joining RHS and participating and being a pre-health student at Dixie State?
I guess my advice would be to just be involved as much as possible. The number one thing I've gotten from RHS, and I think a lot of students get, is that support and that sense of community. And the only way to get that is to just be involved. So I think any way that means for you, whether it's
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Extraordinary Talk Show on another Monday afternoon. I'm super excited about my show and my guest for you today. Today, we are talking about a topic that's very, very close to my heart and probably most of yours, parenting. And to talk about parenting today, I brought in the number one person that I could think of to tell you the best tips, the best tactics that I can possibly give you and cram into 1/2 hour. And this is my guest, Nancy Hugo, a.k.a. my mother. So welcome. I would usually call my guests by their first name, but I'm just going to call you Mom. So welcome, Mom. My mother has, I did the math, of that I can verify and prove, my mother has spent a cumulative 126 years raising children. She raised 7 children from birth to at least age 18, and most of us beyond that, and now has 27 grandchildren who are also amazing. And it looks like you might hit 30 if Vaughn stays busy. So my mom had 7 children. I'm number 5. And I grew up in an extraordinary home. The type of home and childhood that I had is one that is very, very uncommon in the world that we have today. And so I wanted to bring on my mom while I had her, because she's in town, and get a chance to talk with her about some of the things that she and my dad did consciously to make sure that me and my siblings had a great childhood, and that we grew up to be, that we not only had a wonderful, helpful, loving childhood, but we grew up to be strong, independent, hardworking, contributing adults. So, and that's something I think that my parents did really well. So to get started, Mom, before you had children, what thoughts did you have as you were planning to become a parent?
I looked forward to being a parent. I wanted to be a parent. I think that I recognized that my mother was an extraordinary example of a good parent. And I think as I thought about it, I knew I wanted to do many things like my mother had done.
And what kind of things did Grandma do? And I have a great love for her. What kind of things did Grandma do when you were a child that were wonderful for you?
My mother, there are many, 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 but my mother realized that I liked to make things. And so she made things available for me to make. My sister was very charismatic and very skilled with all kinds of music, both singing and playing instruments and playing the piano. And I have no musical talents at all. So my mother made sure that I had things to make. And when she realized I wanted to knit, she found a friend that could teach me how to knit. Then later she found another friend that could teach me how to turn my knitting into sweaters. And that skill, which I now call my needle art skills, have given me joy through my whole life. And I think that that's one example of what my mother did, is she recognized my strengths and made sure I could develop them.
And for that specific skill, it has been tremendously beneficial for all of us. I was the one of the 4 daughters that didn't care too much for sewing. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it the way that you and my sisters did. But because you taught all of us, I can follow a pattern and sew something if I want to. And of my 4 sisters, all 4 of us wore handmade wedding dresses at our weddings that had been made by either you or my siblings, which I thought was pretty cool. Even my brother Mike can follow a pattern and has made several dresses for his nieces.
And daughter.
And daughters.
That actually is the reason I'm here this week, is I came down to help my daughter-in-law work on a quilt for her daughter's wedding.
And that's pretty cool. Those quilts also that Grandma made and she taught you how to make and you taught us how to make them are definitely a very, very strong part of our family. You can go into everybody's house, every cousin, and they've got a quilt that's handmade by us. Okay, so getting back to parenting. So when you were looking at how your mother focused on your values and recognized you as an individual, what were some of the ways that you did the same thing with your kids? And I know we've talked a lot about you were really, really great at empowering us and allowing us to come up with solutions. If there was an issue or a problem or even just a question and something that we wanted and we didn't know how to get it, you gave us the encouragement to try and find solutions for ourselves. One example would be when Mike wanted skis.
Mike wanted skis. They were cross-country skis. They were on sale. If we bought them, the whole family could go cross-country skiing together.
And that's a lot of skis.
And that was something that Mike really wanted. And they obviously, even though they were on sale, weren't in the budget this month. And you had to buy them when they were on sale. And Mike came up with the idea. He said, well, if I buy the groceries this pay period, we'll have enough money to buy skis because I won't buy very many groceries. We'll eat beans.
And that's funny of Mike to say because Mike ate more than anybody else in the family, almost combined.
Yes. And so Mike made the grocery shopping list. We bought beans. We used a lot of food that we already had in the house. And we bought skis. And we still have those cross-country skis in our camping room.
And I even used those skis when I took my foster daughters skiing and had a wonderful time with them. So that was really cool that Mike did that. But I love that it was his idea and that you went along with it because some parents would have just said, nope, not happening.
We were a little hesitant about the idea of beans for 2 weeks, but yeah.
And I don't like beans, but I'm glad we still have skis.
We found a lot of other food in the cupboard that could make beans more palatable.
Good. So as you and Dad were talking about what kind of skills you wanted to teach your children, what things were important to you to raise children in a certain way? What kind of skills did you want us to have?
I'm not sure if we ever sat down specifically and had a serious discussion about that, but I'm sure it came up in the conversation through the years. And there were a few things that we wanted to make certain that our children had when they got to be adults. We wanted them to be able to be employable, to have job skills and job ethics that would enable them to be positive for an employer so that they would be able to get a job and keep a job and have a better job. We also recognized that it was important for each child to be able to drive and get themselves where they wanted to go. We had friends who said, well, my kids aren't getting driver's licenses because they can't afford their insurance. They have to buy their own insurance. And our approach instead was, we'll pay your insurance and you'll do our errands.
You also paid for gas, which I appreciated.
Okay. But for children to be able to learn that they could get where they needed to go and where they wanted to go is very crucial in today's world, in our opinion.
Paying for the insurance, I always, kind of knew about it, kind of appreciated it along the way. But one day that it made a difference to me was when I moved out, because I moved out the week I graduated from high school, and I was actually only 17 then. And you asked me what I wanted for a graduation present. And some of my sisters had gotten a sewing machine or really nice luggage and done some things like that. And I said, nope, just keep paying my car insurance. And I think you paid my car insurance for another 6 months.
I didn't remember that. Okay.
But that was what I asked for, and I think that you were okay with it. As a mother, you taught a lot. It was more than just being in the house and loving me, which you also were good at. But I don't think a day went by from the time I was very, very small that I didn't learn something from you. You had many ways that you taught us. You even played games like matching games to help me learn my letters and what sound they made. And because of that, by the time I got to kindergarten, I was pretty much reading on a first grade level because of those things. It was very important, I think, for you and Dad to make sure that you were always teaching. Do you have any thoughts on that, on some of the other things that you taught us? That might be in your notes.
Oh. Where in my notes?
I think near the top. That also links right with discipline, because teaching is part of discipline. I think people mistakenly interchange the words discipline and punishment, and I think that that's erroneous. I think discipline is a full frame that includes discipline, or that includes punishment, and it also includes teaching. So when it came to discipline, what were your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think that there's some basic things that the family has to have. Basic rules that you always do and that you just do. Some of those are, we just try to be good people. We'll always do our schoolwork. We eat dinner every night together. And of course, there's rare exceptions, but it's an exception instead of the usual. Everybody puts away their own laundry, and you get it put all the way in the drawer. We respect each other. I think our children all knew that they were a Hugo, and that everybody could expect basic good behavior from them because they were a Hugo.
Well, and as the fifth child, once I got into a class in elementary school and my teacher said, "Oh, you're a Hugo. I've had 3 or 4 of your brothers and sisters before." I kind of knew already that I couldn't mess up because they had an expectation for how a Hugo was going to behave in class, and I had to meet that same expectation.
But I think they were reasonable and healthy expectations, so it wasn't a problem.
I agree. And I think that if there was a situation, you and Dad were usually pretty good about listening to my side, partly because I didn't get in trouble very often. So if I did, you wanted to find out from me what was really going on and what caused that. Part of discipline, like I said, is teaching and pre-teaching. And pre-teaching is a tactic that I used a lot when I was a foster mom, but I realized when I learned it that I already knew that concept because it was a concept that you and Dad used.
I think that when we went places we hadn't been before, we would say, now this is how it's going to go. For example, if we took friends with us sledding, they'll get a chance. Everybody will take a turn at sledding, and you don't push anybody or get anybody's way. If you're going to the grocery store, and we went to the grocery store as a family every payday, at the grocery store, you will not ask for food that's not on the shopping list. The only person that can choose food that's not on the shopping list is Mom or Dad. And when I say go get milk or go get green beans or whatever, you'll help. That's part of going grocery shopping.
I always thought it was fun.
Oh, I think all of my kids liked grocery shopping. And some of their spouses have been very surprised at that. What could be fun about going grocery shopping?
It was a scavenger hunt.
It was a scavenger hunt, an event we all did together. And as we got to everything in the carts, everybody that had obeyed the rules, which was everybody, got to choose a candy bar as their treat. And then sometimes that candy bar varied. There was a time when it was individual containers of chocolate milk or other treats. But that was part of it, was you help, the whole family helps out. The whole family gets a treat. We go home and the whole family puts away the groceries. We
did. One thing that's always, when I look back on it, is interesting to me, even though at the time it was just the way it was we had a family of 9, and we had one of the very first Dodge Caravans, which had 7 seatbelts. And boy, was that a big deal because the whole family could fit in one car. That didn't mean that we all wore seatbelts, but again, please
I think
forgive
everybody
me,
wore
listeners.
seatbelts, but some people share their seatbelt.
That might be true because I am 41 and I grew up before seatbelts were law. So we wore seatbelts as much as we could, and that was almost all the time. But it was okay when you load 9 people up into a car that has 7 seatbelts to go to the grocery store. What's interesting is when you come home from the grocery store with enough food for 9 people and the 9 people in the car. One thing that I learned from Dad was how to play Tetris, because Dad could fit all those groceries in that car. And the same thing when we went on vacations. I don't know how he did it with 9 of us in a car that seated 7 people, and all of our stuff, and usually Christmas presents too, were all loaded into one car.
We did get the idea one year, and it worked. When we go to Grandma's for Christmas, let's buy all of our presents that we can from the JCPenney catalog and have them shipped to Grandma's. But then you still have to get them home.
Well, we did the same thing. Now we have Amazon. When we were kids, we didn't have Amazon. But a few years ago, 5 years ago, in fact, we went to Hawaii for Christmas, and we got to be there with you, and altogether there were 16 of us. So it wasn't all the family, but it was a good group of the family together, and we ordered almost everything on Amazon and had it delivered to Hawaii. But then we had to bring an extra suitcase to bring it all back.
Yeah.
how we did that was creative. Can you talk about vacations? Because the vacations were very, very memorable. Many of my awesome memories from my childhood were from our vacations.
We believed that vacations were important for kids. And every year we got a tax refund. And every year we spent our tax refund on our vacation. And how far we got to go on our vacation greatly affected by how big the tax refund was. The years we got a bigger tax refund, we could go farther. And there were always lots of places that we enjoyed going. We went to Carlsbad Caverns. We went to visit Grandma and Grandpa. We went to Texas and swam in Galveston Beach.
And you and I earlier talked about the trip we took my 5th grade year. Can you tell us about that trip and how we came up with the decision to go on that trip?
I don't remember why we concluded that we had the money to afford this trip, but it was UTA weekend.
UEA weekend?
UEA weekend. And so the kids had school off from Wednesday when school was out until Monday morning. And so I was realizing that our grandparents and great-grandparents were growing older. So I said, my husband and I talked it over, and we said, we can either go to Colorado and visit Grandma Lydia, or else we can go to California and visit Grandma Hugo. But which one would we go to? So we called all the kids together and we made the proposal. Let's all go on a vacation over UEA weekend. Should we go visit Grandma Lydia or should we go visit Grandma Hugo? And immediately Della said, oh, let's go to Disneyland Paris. And we said, I don't see how that could ever work out for this 4-day weekend. But by the way, later we went to Disneyland Paris.
I didn't get to go on that trip.
No, but so I laid out the points. We laid out the points of why it was better to go to Grandma Hugo's and why it was better to go to Grandma Lydia's. And the kids added their viewpoints and we discussed it. And at the end of the discussion, we concluded that as soon as the kids got out of school on Wednesday, we'd leave for Disneyland.
And Disneyland, California.
Disneyland, California. And we said, in order to be able to afford this, we're not going to be able to stay at a fancy hotel at Disneyland. We'll have to stay at a cheaper hotel, and we will have to eat sandwiches that we make in the car. But if that's what you really want to do and you're willing to do it that way, we'll go. And we went and we had a great weekend.
We did. And it made me feel very empowered. It made me feel very important that even though we didn't go to Disneyland Paris, you listened and you didn't just knock over my idea and say, no, honey, that's not what we brought to you. But you listened to what I had to say. And as my siblings got involved and they voted too, you really let us make that decision, even though it wasn't what you had been going for. And I think that is very empowering. That might be something that bothers my husband a little bit because he comes to me with an idea and I say, no, let's do this thing instead. And he would probably like it better if I just went along with the ideas sometimes. But I appreciated that very much. When it came to home rules, just rules in the house, we didn't have like a list of rules on the wall or anything, but we all knew that the underlying rule was respect, that in our home, we treat each other with respect. And I think that made our home a very different home from other homes that I visited, because I'd go to a friend's house or somewhere else and you'd often hear bickering and arguing or people putting each other down. And that just didn't happen in our home.
I think perhaps my husband set that rule. He just did not like fighting and he wanted respect. An example of that is, and it's kind of small in some ways, but the first year we were married, he found a friend of mine and asked them to make my birthday cake. And we have been married 51 years and I have never made my own birthday cake. And I have always had a birthday cake. And that was a kind of respect that he had for me, that he would honor my birthday. Our children probably fought a little bit when they weren't near their dad, but he just did not allow arguing. And somebody asked me once, what did your husband do when your children were disrespectful? And I just really almost don't remember my kids being disrespectful.
I can come up with some suggestions or some answers for that, because if you're going to have arguments between 9 people, it's most likely going to happen in the car. And when you have 9 people in a car that seats 7 driving 2,000 miles for our vacations that we did every year, there was often bickering in the car. And Dad's way to handle that, he would give us a warning. He would always make sure he gave us a warning, sometimes 2, but you could tell when Dad was done dealing with it. He would pull over to the side of the road. He would tell the offending parties to exit the vehicle. He would point to a sign, maybe a half mile or so up the road, and he would say, "I'll meet you there." And then he would drive, leaving me and or my siblings on the side of the road, knowing that we had to run to catch up. We were never out of sight. You were never not able to see us as we were catching up with the car. But one thing that did is it got our energy out, because when you're in a car for hours, you get restless energy, and that got rid of that. It also just set a very defined boundary that this is the expectation, and if you don't meet the expectation, you're going to have a consequence, which I think was part of the discipline that you and Dad did always, that I just always knew if I do this and get caught, I'm going to get in trouble. There's the getting caught part that made it different. But
I think that parents also have to provide ways for children not to be in trouble. So, for example, on card trips, I remember having latch hook rugs to make. I remember my girls crocheting. I remember braiding yarn and trailing it out the car window on empty roads going across New Mexico. Books on tape.
We listened to a lot of Louis L'Amour when I was growing up, because we had a lot of Louis L'Amour books on tape.
But so I think that parents have to plan ahead when there are potentials so that that's already dealt with partly before they go. It's going to be a lot easier for kids to be in a car all the way to grandma's house if they have things to do while they're traveling.
So a lot of this parenting thing seems like it comes down to thinking ahead.
There's a lot of that, yeah.
Because you have to think ahead to do pre-teaching. Hey, we're going here. You're going to act this way in the car. Here's some things that we've thought of ahead of time to make it easier.
And then knowing what's really important. I think that parents need to make sure that when there does need to be discipline, that the discipline matches the infraction.
Absolutely.
If all a child did was leave their dirty clothes on the floor, they don't need to be punished for a week. They need to go pick up their dirty clothes and put them in the dirty clothes hamper, and then it's over and you do something else.
And I loved that as a kid growing up, and I also think that it's helpful for the parents. I almost never got grounded. We had other consequences that I had when I acted up, and I did act up, but grounding was almost never one of them, because grounding is punishment for the parents too. And I think maybe you didn't want to have to deal with that either. But I think that one of the biggest mistakes that parents make, and every parent makes it, I've made it, and it's really something we do in all types of our life, all sides of our lives, but especially in parenting, is we tend to overreact as parents. And we might see a behavior that is little, but our emotional reaction to it is big. Maybe it's the 4th time I've told my son to pick up his dirty clothes off the floor. So instead of asking him to get up and throw them away or put them in the hamper, my reaction gets bigger. So I give him a bigger consequence that isn't really effective. And I think that's something that we do a lot as parents and other in the rest of our lives. But I think that you and Dad didn't do that as much as many parents do.
One of our daughters once had a neighbor tell her, "Oh, I'm so glad you use the love and logic parenting method, so I'm not the only one in the apartment building that's using it." And my daughter said, "I never heard of that before." But the point is that discipline or punishment, and there really wasn't too much punishment. The biggest punishment was running around the block. But discipline matched what had gone wrong, and it more often is a teaching tool. Okay, you spilled water on your clothes. Now you have to wear wet clothes. Oh, next time you won't spill water on your clothes.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk for a second about what you just mentioned, is the running around the block, because some people probably won't understand that. That was a regular consequence for us at home. Was we lived on a square city block, and if you got in trouble, you often had to go run around the block. And if it was a larger infraction, you had to run around the block more times.
Or if you were a small child, you had to run to the corner and back.
Yes. I think I held the record for the most laps for one infraction because I had to run around the block 9 times once. I think Mike held the overall record for total amount of laps, but we haven't kept track of his total
The thing
amount.
about Michael is he would stay angry or irritated until he ran around the block and got good oxygen in his system and it cleared his head and he came back in a good frame of mind. So that was one reason why we liked Mike to run around the block, is it could get him out of his bad mood.
Right. There were times, and it certainly wasn't every time, but there were times when Dad had me run around the block and I got the feeling that he was ticked off, that whatever I had done had triggered his irritation, and he never ever wanted to deal with me and discipline me when he was angry. So I always thought that maybe part of having me run around the block got me out of the house so he could sit down and calm himself and be quiet and ready for when I got back. In fact, I think there was one time that he had me come back and he wasn't ready yet, so he told me to go do another lap. But then he did a really wonderful thing, which was when I got back, and he would do this from the time I was young enough to have a conversation all through my whole life, was when I got in trouble, I would have my consequence, whatever was applicable, whether it was cleaning the thing up or running around the block or whatever. And then he would sit down with me. And when I was real little, he would have me sit right on his lap, and we would talk about what I did wrong and why it was wrong and what I should have done instead. And growing up, that was just what I was used to. But that element of teaching was critical. In fact, that was something that I learned to do with my foster kids. And I was like, oh, my dad always does this. But it was something that most parents don't think of to do, is to sit down and say, you did this wrong. This is what was wrong. This is why it was wrong. This is a better choice. And that made a huge impact on me. Also, when I got up from Dad's lap, he wasn't mad at me anymore. And that was very, very important to me going forward, that Dad wasn't holding a grudge.
It's behind you. It's done.
Exactly. And that I think has made it easier for me to forgive myself and not hold grudges against myself through my whole life. And so I'm grateful for that. Okay, we got about 3 minutes left, Mom. If you could go back and do something differently as a parent, what would you do differently?
There are 2 things that I would do differently. We only got around to talking about one of these ahead of time. But, and that one is, I would teach my children how to fight. My husband grew up in an environment where there was a lot of fighting, and he did not want our home to have fighting, and he did not allow it. It just was not allowed. And so our kids did not learn how to bargain with someone that was causing them problems, nor did they learn how to just stand up for themselves when it was necessary. And as I have looked at my children in their adulthoods, I wish that each one of them was better at saying, nope, that's not an acceptable answer for me. We won't do it that way. I think also I would be more protective to my kids against strangers. I think we welcome too many people into our home that maybe we should have not been so welcoming.
Perhaps. And so I see your concern when you say that. And this is a thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about before. But at the same time, our home was always open and always welcome.
Especially to our children's friends.
Yes. And I had many friends who came over and commented on the way that our house felt. That our house just felt different than other people's houses did. And we also had a lot of, my husband calls your house the Hugo Hostel, because you never know who's going to be staying there when you show up. There's always people who, are coming for an educational week and needed a place to stay.
This last week, I only had one person come spend the night that I didn't know ahead of time.
Only?
Only one. This week.
I know of one night right after my brother moved out, my baby brother, that you and Dad had the house to yourself. Other than that, I'm not sure you've ever had the whole house to yourself for 24 hours.
We did have since 2010. We have had,
but not too much, and I know not lately. So, a couple things before we go.
One of the things that I judge as a blessing is when I have to change the guest room sheets.
I can agree with that. I think that would definitely be a blessing. That is a blessing. So, 2 things before we go, because we have about 40 seconds left. One is I want to wish my mother a very happy birthday on Sunday.
Thank
because
you.
This is your birthday, and I haven't kept track of how old you are. Do you want to tell us how old you are?
Well, I'll just tell you that my husband and I decided 2 years ago that we'd switch the clock back to 60.
That's good enough for me. Well, I'm 41, and I know that you're more than 19 years older than me, but I'm not going to argue with it. And I'm really grateful to have you on today, Mom. One thing I wanted to leave our guests with is a poem that was on cross stitch up on the wall my whole childhood, and now I own this cross stitch. And it says, "Cleaning and scrubbing can wait till tomorrow. For babies grow up, we've learned to our sorrow. So quiet down cobwebs, dust go to sleep. I'm rocking my baby, and babies don't keep." And Mom, I also just want to thank you because I like who I am. I think I'm pretty cool. And so much of who I am is because of you and because of Dad and the things that you taught me as a parent and the things you've taught me as an adult. And ultimately, from 9 months before I was born, the absolute and complete love that I've always had. I've always known I was loved. And I think that that's one of the greatest gifts that you can give anybody is to make sure they know that they're loved. So thank you.
I do love you.
And I love you too. And that's our show. So thank you, extraordinary friends. We'll see you next week. Those are positive emotions because they are there to teach you. This is an excellent opportunity for you to learn, to gain greater understanding. Now, this isn't an easy thing. I've said that already, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. The first time you face your guilt and your sadness, it's tough. The second time, it's still tough. The time after that, it's a little bit easier. And then it's going to keep getting better and better. And then you're going to go, wait, I'm feeling sad. This is what I'm feeling. This is what my body's doing. I already know why I'm having these feelings because I had them before. Now I know how to go into it, fix it, and make myself better. And that's what we're all here for, is to make ourselves better. Take a deep look inside, realize who you are, and realize that even if you can't see it, you are extraordinary.